So this is My Love by Jimmy Cliff. My Love is Solid as a Rock by Jimmy Cliff. Solid as a rock. Actually, what do you want to do as the honest?
All right, it's dedicated to me by Samuel Dami to compensate for not coming over the weekend.
And that's how we are opening Food for Thought. Is brought to you by Overman Productions in partnership with Joy FM and National Theatre. The best play you will see for a very long time is Dora. Why I saw it on last Saturday. So the tickets are available for the second weekend. Now, it's not this weekend, it's next weekend.
It's the next weekend. It's the Easter weekend.
Great. 20th, 21st, and 27th.
That's right.
22nd of April, sorry. You can buy your tickets through Roverman Productions mobile money platforms on MTN, Vodafone, and Airtel Tigo. Go on rovermanproductions.com and its other social media platforms. It's also brought to you by GCB Bank, your bank for life. The play is Dora. Why? Now,
why?
I want to ask you why.
And the tickets, you can get a ticket here at Joy FM.
Here at Joy FM.
So.
Uncle, I want to ask you why.
Okay, ask me why.
We learned on Saturday that.
That's right.
In the 21st century, a woman can also propose to a man. Which
Correct.
Is very powerful.
Yes.
It's very, very powerful.
Yes. And a woman did.
And a woman tried to do.
A woman did.
A woman tried to do, but she was stopped. And then it was reversed. Why? Uncle, why? Uncle, why? Uncle, why?
Oh, so what's your issue?
My issue is that in keeping with 21st century modernity,
yes,
where a woman can do what a man can do and better, and we should have left the woman to propose.
Are you one of the people with the POP on your mouth?
Oh, Uncle, I talk for a living, you can't.
No. It's one thing talking for a living, and another thing being confronted with a particular skirt and blouse.
I know.
That could be a very different matter.
I know what you are saying, but
okay. But you know, Dan, as somebody who has been involved in marriage counseling for some time, I can tell you that the majority of marriages would not have happened but for the initiative of the woman. The majority of marriages, majority of relationships happen because the woman decided, I want this, it's going to happen. Got it and made sure it happened.
You know what? When you say that, it makes me think of, I made this statement on Friday on the show when I said, my dad says that a man proposes but a woman chooses. A man proposes to the woman but the woman chooses.
Or sometimes by the time we propose, they have already chosen us.
Oh, they have already chosen.
And they
were just waiting for you to.
Oh, yes.
Depending on your smartness and your speed.
I tell the story of a friend of mine, a retired captain in the army, who thought that he had strategized for his wife, only for the woman to let him know 10 years into their marriage that before you saw me, I had seen you and told all my friends that I will get you to marry me. So before you saw me, actually, 2 months before I came to your attention, I had already strategized.
You know what? I'm actually beginning to think back to some of the interesting incidents in my life and I watch.
We'll have the confessions later.
Yes.
The confessions of Daniel Dazi and then we shall list all the women who are asking, Dan, why? Dan, why?
They are not that me. Okay, so actually, what's today's message?
Today I begin a series of my personal reflections on Easter. I hope you find a blessing in them. The first time I was hit by a personal tragedy was in 1968 when my father died from stroke. I was 14. And I had just become a born-again Christian, but unfortunately, I had been fed on a toxic spiritual diet that said bad things happened only to bad people, that if you're a Christian, only good things happened to you, that misfortune and suffering are always evidence of God's wrath and punishment. Based on that diet, and knowing that I had done my best to honor God, the death of my father shook my faith and confidence in a good God. Why would God take my father away when I needed him the most? I knew that with the death of my father, any hopes for further education were gone. That tragedy and the fact that I did not have the right spiritual perspective to deal with it threw me into a spiritual wilderness that lasted for more than 5 years. I was bitter with God, but too afraid of Him to walk away from Him completely. My spiritual growth and development were seriously hampered by those years in the wilderness, especially when my brothers and I were subjected to all kinds of hardships and indignities after my father's death. We were at the mercy of diverse relatives, and although they meant well, the experience of living with relatives was not always positive nor pleasant. And each negative experience brought back a reminder of my loss and a renewal of my the bitterness at God. Mercifully, with time, I came to read the Bible for myself and slowly came to understand that the teaching that God's blessings upon a Christian means that only good things must happen for the Christian is not only false, but dangerous. And the Easter story makes it clear that bad and terrible things can happen to good people, all in line with God's perfect plan for them. When we read the Easter story, we lose a lot because we are so familiar with it and we know how it ends. We know that the crucifixion of Jesus is not the final thing in the story. We know that it was very necessary. We know that the resurrection would follow. So we do not see how devastating and traumatic the arrest, the sham trial, the torture and crucifixion of Jesus was for those who loved him, for his mother, his disciples, and all those who were committed and devoted to him. Mind you, for Peter and the others, the crucifixion of Jesus was final and irreversible. If Peter knew that there would be a resurrection, he would not have denied Jesus for fear of his life. If the other disciples knew that there would be resurrection, they would not have scattered and gone into hiding. The disciples and all those who loved Jesus spent that Friday to Sunday in deep mourning and in great fear of the Jews, because for them it was all over. Their master had been executed in the worst possible way, and their hopes have been shattered, and the people could be coming after them too. If you do not read the Easter story in their shoes, a lot of the lessons of Easter will be lost on you. For these disciples and followers of Jesus, the day he was hanged on the cross for all the world to see was the worst day of their lives. Remember, these were men and women who had burnt their bridges to follow Jesus. Peter, James, John, and others had left their fishing professions and their fathers to follow him. Matthew had abandoned his career as a tax officer to follow Jesus. Some of the women had left their marriages to follow him. Now imagine the effect on them when Jesus was arrested, tried, tortured, and crucified. The anguish and bewilderment were real. These were heartbroken, traumatized, and devastated people. Much like most of us when God's will is unfolding for us. Because we do not see the future, most of the unfolding of God's will for us frighten and traumatize us. And yet I believe that for every one of us, our day of crucifixion is never our end. Today we read the Easter story and read it with joy because we know the end. Someday we would also look back on our lives and smile at the very days we felt God had forsaken us, because we will see how perfectly those terrible moments fitted into God's perfect plan for us. The next major personal tragedy I suffered after the death of my father was my getting summarily dismissed by my employers in the early 90s. Even though that was also very traumatic and devastating for me, it did not plunge me into the spiritual wilderness for any length of time. So how come I handled the two tragedies differently? Sure, I was older, but the second tragedy could have been more devastating on me because I had the responsibilities and my reputation had been destroyed. So how come it did not drive me to despair? Well, as I said, I had come to read the Bible for myself, and I had come to appreciate the fact that disaster or misfortune is not necessarily a sign that God is punishing us. And the Easter story illustrates that very well. Every major incident in the arrest and trial of Jesus is underscored in the Bible with the words, quote, "This happened to fulfill what had been written by the prophet," end of quote. In other words, it was God's will that Judas sold out Jesus. Even the amount Judas took for selling Jesus was consistent with God's will, and also what the money was eventually used for are all recorded in Zechariah chapter 11, verse 13. One of the heartbreaking aspects of the Easter story is that Jesus' disciples and followers all deserted him when he was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. And that is also consistent with God's will as is recorded in Zechariah 13, verse 7. The terrible mistreatment and torture, the mockings, the slaps, the scourging, the crown of thorns, he being offered vinegar on the cross, he being crucified between two thieves, and being buried among the rich, all these were consistent with God's perfect will for Jesus and are all recorded in prophecy. These were all the unfolding of God's will for the one of whom God himself said, quote, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased," end of quote. Nothing about the terrible treatment dished out to Jesus at his arrest, trial, and crucifixion took God unawares, and everything was consistent with his perfect plan. Defective spiritual teaching and preaching are more dangerous than the activities of powers of darkness and have been responsible for the shipwrecking of many people's journey in life. And yet, the Bible makes it very clear that God's will may take us along some very unpleasant and uncomfortable paths, and he will still be with us. Over 50 years after my father's death, I look back and say that the death of my father was one of the best things that happened to me and my siblings, because it ejected me from my protective cocoon and forced me to really live. And almost 30 years after my dismissal, I thank God for it because it forced me to go out of my comfort zone to claim my place in the bigger world. I pray that this Easter we will all try and read the Easter story for ourselves with fresh eyes, that we will read it as if we do not know the story and do not know the end. If we do that, I'm sure that we will be very blessed by the insights we will receive from the reading. We will then understand that our God never leaves us nor forsakes us, even in the worst of times. He is that faithful. And that is the beginning of my series of personal reflections on Easter. And I'll keep it going between now and Easter.
We all need to stay away from familiarity, isn't it?
It robs us of so much.
Yes.
It robs us of so
They
much.
say familiarity even breeds contempt.
Yeah.
In some cases. Thank you very much, Anklevo.
Oh, and it was wonderful meeting your squad.
Yes.
Dan has a squad.
The men.
Yeah, the men. No, the boys.
Okay, so it's so let me say good morning to my brothers, McLean Otuatha and Amishadai Ofori.
Yeah.
Yes, McLean, who just got married in December and is having a very, very interesting.
But guys, it was good meeting you and knowing that you guys are behind him gives me even more hope.
Thank you very much, Aklebo.
Yeah.
All right. So that's food for thought. I wish Aklebo would leave, but the show has to continue. Marcus Anthony says, "You've made me laugh so hard with